Now at 11, the Gang of Five texting scandal isn't over yet. The Hamilton County prosecutor says he could still file charges.
We are talking about these 5 council members you see behind me. Some of them you elected into office.
Yeah, tonight we're actually going to walk you through today's court hearing, what the text messages said, and how this impacts you. Now, so far, this is costing the taxpayers $176,000. That covers the legal settlement, legal fees, and other costs. Tonight, Councilmember Chris Seelbach says he plans to pay back his part of the fine tomorrow. Still, Judge Robert Ruhlman has made it clear that he's appalled by the whole thing.
Back out to our co-anchor, Craig McKee, who has some new information. What do you know, Craig?
You know, Chief Elliot Isaac mentioned something earlier talking about training, the quick response to this active shooter today. And, you know, I want to bring in my colleague, Tom McKee. Tom, they practice, you know, over and over and over for situations like this, hoping it never happens. But you found out some new details about how prepared they were.
Well, basically, whenever you have a situation.
I want to show you, though, right behind me with this new vantage point on the west side of the Fifth Third Center building, you can see what I've counted so far as 17 evidence markers going up to the letter Q so far. That's all I can see on this side, but these are evidence markers. Of course, we're talking about the casings from the officers who were responding, possible bullet fragments, you know, being marked here as well. So 17 markers here. We've seen a number of investigators out here doing their measurements and photos. In fact, if photojournalist Terry Helmer can pan over here to the left, you can see a device over here that the investigators have set up, and it's taking measurements and pictures, and it's all digital, you know, obviously technology that they'll go back and then recreate the crime scene and all of the measurements, similar, you know, similar item that they use out during accident reconstruction. Some things have changed in the point that the lockdown on the building is being slowly released. We can actually see here the walkway. These are folks coming out of the building that have been released after a floor-by-floor, room-by-room search by investigators, by CPD here, and that is again part of the protocol. We know that the threat was neutralized. We know the suspect is dead. But in these types of scenarios, they don't know anything else about what the plan was for this particular individual. So were there other people involved? Was there something else planted before the attack? All of those things. They look at everything. Everything is on the table in these situations. So they had to go through floor by floor, room by room, and have contact with each individual person. They ID them, they process them through, and then they're released. And we spoke to Councilmember Amy Murray just a few moments ago, and she's been in contact with folks who are still upstairs, still hunkered down, still locked down, as that process continues. So we are still several hours, you know, obviously before the scene down here gets cleared up. We have seen some emergency crews leave the area, go back into service. But I want to bring in my colleague, Allie Kramer. Allie, you were here pretty much at the start of this, and you saw that initial response. Kind of describe what you saw and who you've spoken to.
Yeah, so Craig, initially I was running down the street.
This is body cam video from Glendale officer Joshua Hilling. It records the encounter last Tuesday between Hilling and Javier Pablo Aleman, who was armed with a knife. Tonight, we break down the seconds that Officer Hilling has to react to Aleman. At this point in the video, Officer Hilling asks Aleman to walk to his cruiser, where he tells him he plans to pat him down for officer safety. Once at the cruiser, though, Aleman turns suddenly, and in less than 2 seconds, Aleman reaches behind his jacket for that knife. You see it there. He begins to also yell, "Kill me, kill me," as we start the video back up. And in less than 2 more seconds, Hilling pulls out his gun, and you can clearly see the knife right there in Aleman's hand. 2 more seconds go by, and a shot is fired, the casing captured in this frame of the body cam video. Aleman goes to the ground when that shot is fired. He's shot in the abdomen, but eventually he gets back up on his feet and continues his advance toward Hilling with that knife still in his hand. You can see him getting back up there. Now, while Aleman keeps yelling, "Kill me, kill me," Hilling orders him to stay on the ground on I-75. Hamilton County Prosecutor Joe Dieters today says the officer did nothing wrong in this case, and Hilling's police chief praised him for showing restraint during this entire situation. Ultimately, a Sharonville officer who arrived as backup tased Aleman, and he was taken into custody. You can take a look at the full body cam video for yourself on our website, WCPO.com. Also new tonight, a plan to raise Ohio's gas taxes going forward. Today, the Ohio House passed the spending bill that makes a nearly 11-cent per gallon increase on the tax on gasoline. It would also raise diesel prices by 20 cents per gallon. The proposal is lower than what Governor DeWine called for in his State of the State address. He said what he proposed was the bare minimum to address dangerous roads and intersections. The bill now goes on to the Ohio Senate. New at 11, a Kenton County grand jury indicts a man in a Covington murder here. Patrick Blanchard is accused now of killing Natasha Henderson on December 30th. Police say he shot her while riding in a vehicle and left her body in the street. Investigators believe passengers in at least 2 different vehicles behind him witnessed the shooting take place, and anyone with information is asked to come forward. New information at 11 about the most recent landslide on Columbia Parkway. The city tells us a retaining wall failed, causing dirt and debris to fall out onto the roadway. You'll recall the mess forced the city to close westbound lanes between Eastern Avenue and Beachmont Avenue. Tonight, we know a contractor has been hired to design and construct a new wall. We're told the cost won't be more than $1.4 million. It will take about 3 months to complete. Now at 11, Mount Adams is a place full of literal highs and lows. Right now, the neighborhood businesses are struggling to compete with Over the Rhine and the banks. And that means adjusting to a new kind of customer. 9 on your side's Kristen Swilley joins us live right now with how some bars and restaurants there are trying to cater to an older crowd. Kristen? An exclusive access, in fact, to Huber's at the Campbell County Detention Center. In the interview, at her request, she spoke about what lies ahead. Since her sentencing and subsequent turnover of her conviction, we've not heard a word from Shayna Hubers. That is, until now. It's May 8th, and it's here inside the Channel 9 mailroom that I see a letter to 9 on your side. The name on the return address immediately rang a bell. They were handwritten letters from Shayna herself, asking for help. Some may say that this is more by reaching out, this is more of either a publicity stunt or something to derail your second trial. What would you say to somebody that says that?
This is no stunt.
In her first interview since those fatal gunshots in October 2012, which police say came at the hands of Shayna Hubers and killed her boyfriend Ryan Poston, Shayna says she's now concerned Campbell County authorities won't let her get married.
We're only contacting you all to make sure that those rights are respected and that this process is not thwarted because of who we are.
It was the summer of 2016, and apparently love was in the air inside the Campbell County Detention Center.
I originally met McKee 2 years ago when I was taken to a recreation yard that was next to Unique Cell. And we just began talking, and that was how it happened.
You did have a quote. You said, "I don't know if anyone will ever want to marry me if they know that I killed a boyfriend in self-defense." But here you are filing a marriage license, which means you found someone.
That's true. The
person she wants to marry, fellow inmate Richard McKee, who identifies as a transgender woman by the name Unique Taylor.
I don't see Unique as a man or a woman. I see Unique as a soul that I love.
Shayna even draws a comparison between her relationship with Ryan Poston and her new love interest.
Maybe years ago, that wasn't the right person, and so we didn't understand each other as well, and Unique and I understand each other a lot better.
We struck up a conversation, and it just sort of went from there.
Calling me from the detention center, Unique defends their request to marry.
I stand up for my rights, and obviously I'll be standing up for hers too.
I've been doing this for close to 18 years, and not much surprises me.
Campbell County Commonwealth's attorney Michelle Snodgrass won the conviction in Huber's first trial and says her team is now focused on August opening statements.
We are going to go in and we're going to fight for justice for Ryan Poston. So none of this outside craziness has anything to do with our case, and really it doesn't impact us.
I'm not hoping that anyone thinks any differently of me. I'm just hoping that this ensures my right to marry under the U.S. Constitution. That's all I'm here for.
The Campbell County clerk says he's in receipt of the marriage license request and is requesting information left off of the application. As for her case and second trial, currently set for August. Is there anything you regret from 2012? Her answer to that question, what she says about possibly taking the stand in her own defense, and why she thinks things would be different if put into the same situation today. That's tonight on 9 on Your Side at 11 o'clock.
I am looking forward to that, as I know many are as well, but I have to know this. So many people have been asking me, I'm curious too, if they're in prison, is he is unique in the women's cell. How are they able to contact each other?
Unique is with the men, and Shayna obviously with the women. They tell me that they have been able to stay in contact and communicate for over about the last 18 months by sending letters and also using an internal phone system in the jail. So those are some of the details of how they've stayed in touch. We'll have the rest of Shayna's interview, of course, regarding her case tonight at 11. Meanwhile, we have been receiving a lot of emails and calls as to why we chose to talk to Shayna Hubers in the first place. Right now on WCPO.com, you can read the 4 reasons we decided to bring you her story. A recent court ruling put tens of thousands of veterans known as Blue Water veterans on the path to compensation tied to their service in Vietnam. The Department of Veterans Affairs is at the center of the fight, and local vets are holding out hope the VA will finally do what's right.
The distance offshore depended on what target at which we were firing at any given time.
Rex Settlemore's service in the Navy took him to many places. The Vietnam War was one of them.
Our guns had a range of 12 miles, and many times we were called upon to fire as deeply inland as we possibly could, and so the ship moved in within a few hundred yards offshore.
Rex is a Blue Water veteran, so named for the deep blue water the ship sailed on. John Ranson is a Blue Water veteran, too.
A friend of mine who was on Ranger, another carrier, he worked on the flight deck, and he passed 3 years ago, this past December, and he was being treated at the VA, and the presumption was defoliants.
Agent Orange, as it was called, was a defoliant used by the U.S. during the Vietnam War. Those soldiers on the ground are presumed to be contaminated by it and all the ailments that come along. Those who served on the ocean are not. But Rex says this Australian study proves sailors were exposed.
Ships who ingested the seawater, even if the seawater was distilled for freshwater purposes on board, would still contain the Agent Orange contaminants. As a result of that, the Australian government awarded Blue Water presumptive benefits to their Navy veterans.
The VA's post-deployment health expert, Dr. Ralph Erickson, testified in April of 2017 that naval ships would have drawn in water for their distillation from 12 miles out. And so it makes it a little bit harder for this conceptual framework to apply to the U.S. Navy.
I have to tell you, Craig, we served off the coast of Vietnam well within a few hundred yards, and we did not turn off the seawater suctions when we were operating in close. I am unaware that that was ever a policy. It certainly was not a policy that was typically followed by the destroyers that were on gunfire support.
In a January 29th ruling, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit said in the original Agent Orange Act of 1991, Republic of Vietnam covers everyone whose service included duty or visitation in the Republic of Vietnam, which under background law embraces the territorial sea. What was your reaction initially?
I was very encouraged. To me, it was an extremely positive action on the part of the Federal Circuit in Washington, D.C.
If you're going to recognize in-country personnel for the same ailments that we out in the Deepwater had, then it's just fair, as far as I'm concerned.
The VA has not announced whether it will appeal the Federal Circuit decision. If the ruling stands, it could mean thousands of dollars in compensation for Vietnam-era sailors. Meanwhile, current Blue Water Navy legislation was reintroduced in the new Congress. It outlines which Navy members would qualify and the areas impacted. I've shared it on my Facebook page, McKee WCPO, if you'd like to take a closer look. Since our report, our 9 on Your Side I team discovered a connection between the man behind a certain brand of synthetic urine sold in Cincinnati and Cincinnati's own mayor.
So negative, 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 negative.
When the 9 on Your Side I-team tested synthetic urine, the results were clear. So your first look at this, you would say
It's a negative drug screen.
A product marketed for years to pass any urinalysis has ties to Cincinnati, invented and created by Matthew Stevens, who even holds a patent on it. Its sole purpose to produce negative urinalysis results. Hi, is this Matt? When we spoke to Matt by phone, his claim was the urine is designed to pass tests looking for nicotine and not for any other purpose.
Yeah, that's doublespeak, isn't it? I mean, why would you have something that's guaranteed to pass your drug test but not meant to pass a drug test?
Do you know Matt Stevens?
I don't.
Since our report, 9 on Your Side uncovered new information. Our 9 on Your Side I-team discovered Matt Stevens and Mayor Cranley's paths crossed in 2013 during a campaign fundraiser.
So we had a mutual friend who asked Matt to host a fundraiser for me in 2013. Obviously, I was there.
Fundraising paperwork filed with the Cincinnati Elections Commission shows Stevens donated $500 to Cranley's mayoral campaign. Cranley says once he saw Stephen's connection to synthetic urine in our story, he told his campaign to write a check to the Center for Addiction Treatment, or CAT House, for the full amount.
I didn't even know about it until I saw your report.
While Cranley says he wasn't aware of Stephen's ties to synthetic urine, he says products like this are not welcome in Cincinnati.
To engage and market a product that's sole purpose is to engage in fraud is, it should be illegal, and if it's not already, it should be expanded into the fraud statute.
Now, we reached out to a number of state lawmakers about synthetic urine. We even reached out to the online retail giant Amazon, who sells products like this on their site. They didn't get back to us, and only Congressman Brad Winstrup and Senators Rob Portman and Sherrod Brown actually addressed the issue tonight on your side. Winstrup called products like this concerning and promised to continue to support legislation that would make them illegal. Senator Portman said products like this are a disservice to the families experiencing the consequences of addiction. Senator Sherrod Brown said that he'd keep our thoughts in mind should this issue come before the Senate. It's a story we'll continue to follow. New on 11 at 11, it is said the pen is mightier than the sword. For one father and teacher, he's counting on it as he takes the tragedy of his son's overdose to the classroom in the fight against heroin.
Josh was my middle child. He was a typical middle child. Josh was the funniest guy in the room, no matter who was in the room. He was just the most charming young man. We could not get enough of his company. Heroin wrapped itself around his neck like a python until it eventually strangled the life out of him.
When you get to heaven, what will you say to him?
I missed you.
Todd Brabender doesn't want you to know who he is, but he does want you to know his son.
We were a camping family. My kids went camping when they were before 1 year old.
Josh loved being in nature. His entire childhood revolved around exploring.
He'd leave the house at 9 o'clock in the morning and play in the woods till 5 o'clock at night. Now, obviously, we checked on him. Sure. But he loved being outdoors.
That fun-loving spirit who lit up a room began to change his freshman year in high school.
He got into a drug crowd and started experimenting.
Prescription pain pills soon led to heroin and the start of the addiction cycle.
Or he would work, sometimes 8, 9, 12 months at a time. Clean, showed up for work every day, but then the relapse would come, and I could never explain why. In fact, Josh could never explain why.
Years in and out of rehab just didn't work for Josh, and heroin's python grip finally took its toll.
On Saturday, January 2nd, 2016 at 1:37 a.m., my 24-year-old son, Josh Brabender, passed away from a heroin overdose that occurred 48 hours earlier.
The letter Todd is reading,
Josh passed away quietly while I held his hand,
is one he wrote to his 8th grade students at Holy Family Church in Oldenburg, Indiana.
After Josh passed, I stayed up all night, and I was just sitting alone in my living room, 9 o'clock in the morning, 8 hours after he passed, and I said, I got to talk to my 8th graders.
The message is a simple one. Let them get to know Josh, and then have them know the pain, the loss. Connect so they'll think of Josh and make the right decision.
We want to get the message out and try to find some sort of silver lining in this tragedy.
If you can stop one kid at a party and he goes, I'm not doing that, because Josh's picture comes back into his mind, you've won.
Exactly right. Yep.
I'd like to thank Todd for sharing Josh's story with all of us tonight. And while Josh is gone, Todd, we'll get to see part of Josh through the eyes of his grandbaby, seen here in the sonogram that he shared with me. As for this letter that he wrote and also read to his class, I posted this on my Facebook page, McKee WCPO, if you would like to read it in full. It's also on WCPO.com with this story, where you can also find resources to help you or someone you know battling heroin addiction.